conducted.
So let's just focus on jurisdiction for a second. Who does have jurisdiction here?
So the government of Israel has jurisdiction.
Over the occupied territory.
We have jurisdiction.
Over Gaza, which is not entirely occupied.
They have jurisdiction into looking at the actions by their military personnel.
The Palestinians, if they have a complaint, they have to bring it to Israeli courts.
We have jurisdiction, and we
have
with the use of our equipment.
I'm sorry. How do you have jurisdiction?
With the use of our military equipment
Matt,
that we have provided.
How do you have jurisdiction?
If you look at the Leahy law, if you look at
that's not jurisdiction in a criminal process.
You said Israel does have open investigations. Are you satisfied with the way Israel conducts these investigations?
I'm not ready to offer an assessment on that at this point because the investigations are ongoing. I think it's appropriate to wait for their conclusion. The Israeli government was prepared to cooperate in much more extensive detail, and that process was ended by the action the prosecutor.
Let's turn it around. What about Hamas?
I don't think Hamas was going to cooperate with an investigation. No, if that's the question.
So they don't need to go to Gaza and talk to Sinwar and who's the other guy? I can't remember. Yeah, and they don't need to go to Doha, but they do need to go to Israel.
So we don't even get to the question because there's a jurisdictional issue. Right? We don't believe they have jurisdiction over the leaders of Hamas who are in Gaza.
But now you're.
We have more than one concern about this case.
I get that, but
so I would say, Hello, everyone. Good to be back after some time on the road. I'm going to start with some comments on the announcement from the prosecutor at the ICC today. As the Secretary said in a statement a short time ago, the United States fundamentally rejects the announcement today from the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court that he is applying for arrest warrants for senior Israeli officials together with warrants for Hamas terrorists. There should be no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. None. Hamas is a brutal terrorist organization that carried out the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust and is still holding dozens of innocent people hostage, including Americans. Furthermore, the United States has been clear since well before the current conflict that the ICC has no jurisdiction over this matter. The ICC was established by its state parties as a court of limited jurisdiction. These limits are rooted in principles of complementarity, which do not appear to have been applied here, amid the prosecutor's rush to seek these arrest warrants rather than allowing the Israeli legal system a full and timely opportunity to proceed. In other situations, the prosecutor deferred to national investigations and worked with states to allow them time to investigate. The prosecutor did not afford the same opportunity to Israel in this case, which has ongoing investigations into allegations against its personnel. There are also deeply troubling process questions. Despite not being a member of the court, Israel was prepared to cooperate with the prosecutor and had made that clear. In fact, the prosecutor himself was scheduled to visit Israel as early as next week to discuss the investigation and hear from the Israeli government. The prosecutor's staff was supposed to land in Israel today to coordinate the visit, and instead, Israel was informed that the prosecutor's staff didn't get on their flight around the same time that the prosecutor himself went on television to announce these charges. These circumstances call into question the legitimacy and credibility of this investigation. Finally, this decision does nothing to help and could jeopardize ongoing efforts to reach a ceasefire agreement that would get hostages out of Gaza and surge humanitarian assistance in. Those are the goals that the United States is pursuing and will continue to pursue despite these actions by the ICC prosecutor. And with that, Matt.
That's it? Nothing else?
That's it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start with that since you started with that. Just very briefly, you said that the actions, the announcement on television and cancellation of the flights of the staff call into question the legitimacy and credibility of the investigation. Do they call those into question for the entire court?
We are just referring to the actions the prosecutor has taken today. The entire court hasn't acted. The prosecutor has taken this initial action. We're going to see what the next step is. But certainly it calls into question the investigation that he has conducted and the action he has taken when you see him short-circuit a process that was underway to gather facts, which is what you expect any prosecutor, any investigator to do when they're considering pursuing such a case.
Okay. And so are you going to do anything about this, or are you going to wait until the judges actually either approve or deny the applications?
I don't have any announcements to make today. Obviously, we've made clear that we reject this action by the prosecutor. We're reviewing his initial statement, and I don't have anything further to announce.
Okay, and then, but I'll let someone else go.
Any,
Okay.
Said? Sure.
Yeah. You said that this could jeopardize efforts for a ceasefire. Why is that? Why should this jeopardize efforts for implementing a ceasefire?
I don't think there's any doubt that this action will embolden Hamas and embolden the leadership of Hamas,
Right.
who have been the principal obstacle to achieving a ceasefire agreement.
So, Hamas a couple of weeks ago basically agreed to the American points for a ceasefire.
It's
but
not
that was
accurate.
rejected
Said.
out of hand.
That's not accurate. Said.
Okay. So let me ask you just one more question. There are many others that would like to ask many other questions. Let me ask you about Rafah. According to the UN, we have 900,000 people flee Rafah. So they just fled. So you were saying all along that unless Israel has a plan to relocate 1.4 million people, you are not going to agree to it. But obviously, this assault is, full-fledged now. They are in the center of Rafah, as we understand it. 900,000 people, which is, almost a million people, that is, so have already fled. So what is the United States going to do about this, and how does it view it? Is this, in your view,
I thought you had a question there, but then when you kept going.
Yeah, go ahead.
With respect to how we view it, so we made clear that we oppose a major military operation in Rafah. We don't think that would be productive to Israel's security, either in the short term or the long term, and we think it would have a dramatic impact on the lives of the Palestinian people there and on the ability to get humanitarian assistance in. We have not yet seen Israel launch a major operation. It's something that we are not only watching very closely, but we are in close communication with them about. That said, we do have great concerns about the ability to care for all of the people who have been evacuated and some who have chosen to leave themselves, even if they're not in the areas where Israel has ordered people to leave. We have great concerns about the ability to get them food, water, medicine, humanitarian assistance, shelter, sanitation. And so we are working with the humanitarian community, our international partners, on that question. But we are also engaged in conversations with the government of Israel about this. The National Security Advisor to the President was in Israel this week, meeting with the Israeli government. I will leave it to the White House to speak to those meetings largely, but it is our goal to try to prevent a major operation that would have such a deleterious humanitarian impact.
Okay, and my final one on the issue of the crossing at Rafah. I mean, we have not seen any aid trucks go through for a number of days now, through Rafah and Karma Salim. So how are you getting, you said that you're getting the aid through to those that have been forced to flee Rafah. How are you getting it through?
So first of all, you're right that Rafah is not open. Aid has been going in through Kerem Shalom. There have been some days when the aid has been in the form of commercial trucks, not humanitarian assistance, but it's still food and water that's going into Gaza, getting to people who need it. Of course, we've just opened the maritime route in the last few days, which will allow the increase of humanitarian assistance, and there has been aid going in through the north. That said, we want to see Rafah open as well, and we have been engaged in discussions with our Israeli counterparts and with our Egyptian counterparts about how to effectuate that. It remains a top priority for us.
Is it likely to open in the next day or so?
What's that?
Is it likely to open?
I'm just not. Said I never make predictions.
I'm sorry, I was kind of momentarily stunned by your original answer, so I forgot my question, but these will be brief. So are you okay then with the application for arrest warrants against Hamas?
We do not believe that they have jurisdiction over either of the parties of this
So
conflict, and that includes Hamas.
You don't think that Hamas leaders should be prosecuted?
We absolutely believe that Hamas should be held accountable. That could be
held
hold on.
accountable.
Let me finish. That could be either through the prosecution of the war effort by Israel. It could be
in other words, being killed.
It could be by being killed. It could be by being brought to justice in an Israeli court. We do not believe the ICC has jurisdiction over either of the parties in this case because the Palestinian people do not represent a state.
Okay.
And that includes the leaders of Hamas.
But obviously the administration is also troubled by actions that Israel has taken post-October 7th. So where is the accountability for that? Where do the Palestinians go? This is a question I asked Ned a long time ago, over and over and over again. Where do the Palestinians go to seek redress?
So let me answer this a couple of different ways. First of all, in the short term, with respect to questions of war crimes, Israel does have open investigations, a number of open investigations. We made this public when we released our report on National Security Memo 20, including some investigations that have become criminal investigations into conduct by members of the IDF. That is the first instance for judging whether someone has committed a war crime or a violation of IDF code of conduct. That's one of the reasons why we have concerns about the ICC. The ICC is set up to be a court of last resort. If a country isn't properly holding itself and its personnel accountable, that's when the ICC comes in, not in the middle of the process as they have done here. That said, ultimately, and you know this, Matt, and because we've spoken about it a lot, we believe that there should be the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. And an independent Palestinian state would have the ability to join the Rome Statute and become a member of the International Criminal Court, as every state in the world has the right to do. But that is not.
So where do they go in the meantime?
They are not SOL. I said, first of all, Israel has its own investigations. Second, we have accountability mechanisms here. We have processes that are ongoing to look at Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law. So there are places to look at these questions. It's just, in our view, fundamentally not a role of the ICC. And I should say, but remember, we have a jurisdictional complaint here, in that we don't believe the ICC has jurisdiction. But if you looked at the statement the Secretary made that I echoed in my opening remarks, that isn't our only problem with the action the prosecutor has taken. We also have a problem that he has short-circuited an investigation and brought this action without waiting to see where these Israeli investigations end up, without completing the trip that he had planned to come to Israel to look into these questions. So it's not just a question of jurisdiction, it's also a question of the way the investigation is being conducted.
So let's just focus on jurisdiction for a second. Who does have jurisdiction here?
So the government of Israel has jurisdiction.
Over the occupied territory.
We have jurisdiction.
Over Gaza, which is not entirely occupied.
They have jurisdiction into looking at the actions by their military personnel.
The Palestinians, if they have a complaint, they have to bring it to Israeli courts.
We have jurisdiction, and we
have
with the use of our equipment.
I'm sorry. How do you have jurisdiction?
With the use of our military equipment,
Matt,
that we have provided.
How do you have jurisdiction?
If you look at the Leahy law, if you look at
that's not jurisdiction in a criminal process. That's
not in a criminal process, but it has to do with the determinations that we make and the policies that flow from it.
Not jurisdiction.
But Matt, long term, you were right that we want to see.
You used to work for DOJ, Matt.
You were
on. U.S. does not have jurisdiction.
There are different. I wasn't referring to criminal jurisdiction, Matt. There are different ways to look at this. Long term, we agree with you that the Palestinian people should be a state that has and have the ability to make these determinations. But that's not where we are today. That's where we're trying to get to.
You were fine with the ICC going after.
Go ahead, Humera.
Matt, what about the merits of the arrest warrant? You pushed back on the jurisdiction and the process. Does the United States, is it able to challenge the substance of the arrest warrant? I mean, some of the things that the prosecutor says, evidence his office collected showed Israel has systematically deprived civilians of objects indispensable to human survival, including restricting food, water, medicine, and energy. Is the State Department able to challenge the arrest warrant application on those bases?
I'm not going to speak to all the details of the prosecutor's arrest warrant, because there will be a process for getting into that at the ICC, and people will be able to challenge that. But I'll say we have spoken to the provision of humanitarian assistance, for example, recently when we issued the report on NSM 20, where we laid out where we have seen Israel not taking all the steps that we thought they ought to take, but we saw an improvement and a turnaround and an increase in the ability to get humanitarian assistance in.
But I don't understand why you can't address this right now, because when...
I'm not a lawyer in court going point by point by his arrest warrant.
When South Africa brought the case in ICJ, U.S. called it meritless. And right now, can you call the substance of the arrest warrant applications meritless?
So I will say we believe it is fully unfounded, should not have been brought. Now, with respect to the underlying allegations, we'll have time to look at that. There's an arrest warrant that was issued today. We'll have the time to look at it, to digest it, and perhaps issue a more complete response. But as I said, we shouldn't be where we are today, because there are processes ongoing to look at some of these questions that we think should have been allowed to play out. And as I said, when you look at the fact that the prosecutor was scheduled to go to Israel and his staff was scheduled to go there today, we were puzzled to understand why he would yank those trips and go on television to make an announcement, something that also is very strange. As Matt pointed out, I used to work at DOJ. It's not usually how prosecutors announce their.
I did not say that it was
you pointed
strange
out.
that he
You,
went on
no, no,
TV.
you pointed out I used to work at DOJ. Is what I was referring to. It's a strange thing for a prosecutor to make an initial arrest announcement on television, not in a formal document. So we look at all these circumstances and have real concerns about it.
Right. In terms of accountability, though.
Sorry to put words in your mouth. I think
Well,
it was the
fine,
the part that I meant I was attesting
Are
to
you
was what
telling
followed,
me
not
that Eric Holder never did a TV interview? In your
not
time as spokesman?
not to announce an arrest warrant before we had issued any actual
Okay.
charging documents. No.
So you're just
and I think,
angry
and,
at
no,
his,
and I will
you're
say
angry at the process that he used.
I will say the process itself calls into question the underlying substance.
Right. In terms of accountability, though, you talk about the fact that Israel has open investigations. So what kind of timeline did Israel provide you to conclude those investigations?
So we have made clear to Israel that those investigations ought to proceed expeditiously, and they ought to reach conclusions as soon as possible.
And have they provided you a
I'm not
timeline?
going to speak to our internal discussions or speak for the Israeli government, but it is very difficult always to put a timeline on any kind of investigation, certainly on a criminal investigation, and I wouldn't want to do that on behalf of the foreign government, other than to say our expectation on behalf of the United States is that they should proceed and finish as soon as possible, but not at the expense of thoroughness. And that is always the balance when you look at investigation, is expediency versus thoroughness. You want to be quick, but you want to be thorough. That's more important.
And my final one is, does the ICC arrest warrant, I understand you challenge it from a jurisdiction and process point of view, but I suspect the U.S. still recognizes the ICC, right?
We do.
Right.
Yeah.
So the fact that the prosecutor has applied for an arrest warrant and talking about crimes against humanity, does that give the State Department a pause or give you second thoughts about the conclusions of the NSM report? I mean, you have raised certain concerns there, but then you did find Israel's assurances credible. Is that something that would make you rethink that conclusion?
No. If we saw new evidence, we would always look at that and be willing to, we're always willing to look at our assessments if they are changed by new evidence that comes in the door. But we had conducted a thorough review in writing that report, and there's nothing that we saw in the charges announced today that changes our fundamental conclusions.
Can I just follow up on Matt's first question or second question to you, and you saying that you have nothing to announce today in terms of action that the U.S. might take? Can you just help us understand, is the administration considering taking action against the ICC because of this?
You should not read into my statement to Matt that we are either considering anything or not considering anything. It's just to reflect the fact that this is an announcement that was just made this morning. We are reviewing the document the prosecutor put forward, and I don't have any announcements to make about what our upcoming steps might be. Is
there any way that the U.S. is able to stand in the way of these arrest warrants actually coming to fruition, logistically?
That is a question that is beyond my remit as someone who's not an international lawyer to answer. So I'm happy to look at that question and get back, but ultimately I think that's a legal question for the ICC more than us.
And you said that the U.S. still supports the ICC as a legitimate body, but does this undermine the ICC as a whole? I mean, how do we think about those two things? You guys are still supporting the ICC investigation in Ukraine, yet here you're saying, you don't think they have jurisdiction. But how does that not make an impact on your view of the ICC writ large?
The ICC has done important work over the years to hold people accountable for war crimes and crimes against humanity, and we have supported that work. And that's not changed by the announcement today, but I will say that we do have great concerns about the prosecutor and the steps that he took. And like I said, it's not just because of the jurisdictional question. It would be one thing if we were just looking at a jurisdictional dispute here where the prosecutor believed that he had legitimate jurisdiction and we believe that he fundamentally didn't. That is a legal question that lawyers can argue, as they often do. But ultimately, we look at the way the investigation itself has been conducted, and that gives us added concerns about the actions that he took.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. You mentioned that the US thinks this is fully unfounded. Did you just mean coming to the conclusion of these arrest warrants being sought, or did you mean the whole process?
So I'm not going to. So I mean the entire process. I'm not going to do a factual point by point of each of the charges, but the
just wanted to
process,
check that before
the
I-
process itself, the equation of Israel with Hamas, a brutal terrorist group with a democracy that, for all its faults, does, like any democracy, does have its own existing accountability mechanisms that are underway. We find that process and the outcome that it has generated deeply flawed.
But the ICC coming to this conclusion, presumably they're looking at pretty similar material to what the US looks at when you're doing your own process and assessment of the actions that the US, that Israel, has taken. So if they are looking at open source evidence and that kind of thing, is the US, can you say whether you're confident in the process that the ICC uses to get to its conclusion, or
So
thing is
I don't have any confidence in the process that they use to get to conclusion in this case. In fact, quite the opposite. And I don't know where they got their information. This goes to the point I made in my opening statement about calling off a visit to Israel, where they could have interacted with the Israeli government. They, of course, are not on the ground in Gaza to collect information firsthand. Whether they've been able to collect evidence otherwise, I don't know. I presume we would see as the case goes forward.
What do you mean? You don't know where they got their information from. A lot of it's open source.
That's so. My point
And
is,
do they have to go to Israel to figure out
I
what,
would think
what public comments from Israeli officials?
it is not just so. Whenever you're conducting a case, it's not just a question of public comments. I would think if you were going to bring a case of this nature, you might want to go to the Israeli government and say, "Okay, we have concerns." Hold on, let me just. We have concerns.
didn't?
We have concerns
You're sure
about.
you're sure that they didn't?
We have concerns about the following things. Why don't you brief us on your ongoing
Okay,
investigations
and you know
tell
that
us?
they didn't.
I know they have not conducted a full, complete process to that regard. There was a trip that was scheduled to go through some of these questions.
but
That trip has
before
been in.
now-
Whether they've conducted some limited review, I will let the Israeli government speak to that. I know that they have not. That the Israeli government was prepared to cooperate in much more extensive detail, and that process was ended by the action the
All right,
prosecutor
let's turn
took
it
today.
around. What about Hamas?
I don't think Hamas was going to cooperate with an investigation. No, if that's
okay.
the question.
So they don't need to go to Gaza and talk to Sinwar and who's the other guy? I can't remember. Yeah, and they don't need to go to Doha, but they do need to go to Israel.
So we don't even get to the question because there's a jurisdictional issue. Right? We don't believe they have jurisdiction over the leaders of Hamas who are in Gaza.
But now you're.
We have more than one concern about this case.
I get that, but
so I would say if you.
But if they don't have jurisdiction, then why are you saying that they should have gone to Israel?
Because
Israel is not a member of the court, and you are not a member of the court. So why should they go to Israel?
We have more than one concern. As we said in the statement, despite Israel, we made the clear statement, despite Israel not being a member of the court, they were willing to cooperate. With respect to Hamas, however, I would say it is. You can conclude, looking what happened on October 7th, that Hamas intended to kill civilians. That is
no doubt.
That is without doubt. Absent the jurisdictional questions, it would absolutely be a war crime and a crime against humanity.
I'm just wondering why it's a problem for you guys.
You cannot say the same about the state of Israel.
Well, okay. I'm just wondering why it's a problem for you guys, for the ICC to go after Israeli officials, and doesn't seem to be a problem for them to go after Hamas.
That's not what I said. I made clear already. We don't think they have jurisdiction to go over Hamas, to go after Hamas.
But so should Hamas be held accountable for what they did?
I answered that question a little while ago. I said,
And
yes,
who
they
is
should
to hold them-
absolutely be held accountable. The Israeli government should hold them accountable on the battlefield, and if not a battlefield, in a court of law.
All right.
Could you clarify something you said to Camilla? Sorry, Matt. You said that the fact that they were combined together, the two indictments, if they were separate indictments, if they were separate orders of arrest and so on, would that be acceptable? If, let's say,
It doesn't change the jurisdictional
it does
objection.
not,
that we have.
yeah, but that you would accept, just so I can
No,
understand.
I just
I
said
know,
the opposite. We have a jurisdictional objection.
So,
So,
if,
no.
if there was just an indictment of Hamas by itself and of Israel by itself, you can say we take the indictment against Hamas, but not against Israel. Is that I'm trying to understand?
No, then I thought I was clear. We do not believe they have jurisdiction to either of the parties in this conflict.
Follow up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks so much. So you said Israel does have open investigations. Are you satisfied with the way Israel conducts these investigations?
I'm not ready to offer an assessment on that at this point because the investigations are ongoing. I think it's appropriate to wait for their conclusion. If there are investigations that conclude that we don't think have been conducted appropriately, and we don't think there has been justice when there ought to be justice, and we have the ability to make that assessment ourselves, we will absolutely stand up and say it, but the investigations are ongoing right now. We can't offer that kind of conclusion at this point.
Will there be any consequences if you are not satisfied?
That gets into a hypothetical that's several steps down the road. We haven't even gotten to the point of that sort of finding yet, so I'm not going to engage with that.
Just one more on this in accusations. The ICC accuses Netanyahu and Gallant of causing extermination, starvation of civilians as a method of war, deliberately targeting civilians. Do you think those things are not happening in Gaza?
We don't. We have made clear that there have been steps that we wanted Israel to take to improve the delivery of humanitarian assistance that for a time they weren't taking. Now, they often will come up and present objections and say they're trying to prevent, for example, military items from getting in or dual-use items that can be used for the military to get in. They will say that they have restricted movements in certain areas because it is an area where the military is operating. They don't want to put humanitarian actors at harm's way. Whatever the case may be, there have been a number of times we've made clear that their actions weren't good enough and we needed to see improvements. And you've heard the president say that, you've heard the secretary say that, and more importantly, you've seen the president and the secretary get involved to bring about a change in behavior on behalf of the Israeli government, and we've seen that change. So the fundamental bottom line reality is that we have seen food get in, water get in, medicine get in, not enough, but we have seen a trend line where it is improved.
Are you satisfied with the amount of humanitarian aid getting into Gaza?
We have seen an improvement, but until people in Gaza are not hungry, till they have enough to eat, enough to drink, medicine, shelter, we will not be satisfied, and we won't stop pushing for more. Absolutely. Shannon, go ahead.
It's okay to move on to Iran.
Sure.
Can we still in?
Go ahead, and then we'll come back to you.
Okay. A couple of questions in addition to everybody else asked is, you said that Israel is not a member of the ICC, which is true. But also, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but Israel has supported the candidacy of Mr. Khan when he was elected in 2021. And they wanted him to be there. So the fact that they actually endorsed him, they know there are some consequences. Otherwise, they won't bother in the first place. So this is just to,
It doesn't change the underlying jurisdictional question.
Okay, so my question is, lawmakers agreed with you. They said the same. They repeated the same statement they issued in the White House. But they went further, and they said actually the decision is anti-Semitic. Do you agree that this decision is anti-Semitic as well?
That's not an assessment that we have made or a conclusion we have drawn.
Okay, and one last thing is, on the issue itself, many international lawyers, very well known, different background, they said they found a reasonable ground that actually Israel has committed crime against humanity and war crimes. Does the State Department lawyers have a different conclusion, or you have not reached this conclusion, or they disagree with them? What exactly the difference between the lawyers who work at the State Department and international lawyers who found different conclusion?
So let me try to separate the ICC and answer this in two ways. One, when it comes to the ICC, we have a jurisdictional issue, and then we have an issue with how this investigation was conducted. But to answer your underlying question about making that sort of determination, it is a question that we are looking at here. We have ongoing processes to look at Israel's use of U.S. provided weapons, and those processes are ongoing. We have not yet reached final determinations.